In July, the African Union announced Israel had been granted observer status. It had been trying to be accredited for 20 years, but the move caused an outcry from many member states. South Africa, Botswana, Algeria were aggrieved by that they were not consulted. They also say the AU supports the Palestinian cause, and the decision flies in the face of that resolution. Now the status faces a legal challenge. A complaint has been filed with the African Court on Human and People's Rights. Let's discuss this with Nadim Mohammed, one of the lawyers involved. Nadim, thank you for your time. So just for clarity, is it with the Commission for People and Human Rights, or is it a legal process as in litigation? And in either case, just give us the outlines of what it is that you are seeking to achieve.
Good afternoon, Tulasizo, and thank you so much for having us. Tulasizo, so in essence what it is, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has a charter, all right? That's the Banjul Charter. And that charter effectively guides member states or individuals who are not member states or NGOs or other organizations who have a complaint against human rights abuses or violations against another member state or another organization over which the African Union has authority. So the African Commission effectively meets out these regulatory functions or these authoritative functions on behalf of the African Union. So for all intents and purposes, the complaint or the communication that is lodged is a legal communication, but what it does is it does two things. One, it gives the entity against whom you are complaining against in a normal, ordinary course, it gives that entity a right of response. But then what it does is it forces the commission to, at a sitting, should it be admissible, should the complaint be admissible, at a sitting, to vote on the outcome of such a complaint. I just want to very quickly explain to you how this complaint is phrased. An ordinary complaint would, as I say, be by a member state against another member state, or it would be by an NGO or another activist or political organization or an individual who is aggrieved himself personally against another member state. Now, because it's against a member state as in a state that has membership with the African Union, the African Commission has authority over that member state. This particular complaint is substantially different. What we've sought to proceed in accordance with the rules of procedure, and more specifically, motion procedure in terms of Rule 49A. And we say that the African Commission and or the African Union are incompetent in the decision it took in July of 2021 by allowing Israel observer status in the African Union. So that's the nub of the complaint. But what we then do is we utilize Article 46, Article 53, Article 55, Article 56, and Article 57, and we guide the Commission and we say, in accordance with these articles, do a few things. And I'll get into that in a moment when you ask your next question.
Yeah. So is this largely a procedural complaint that says the procedure was not followed, was not proper, in that you describe this as being illegal and unilateral on the part of the AU Commission chairperson, or is it largely based on the allegation of war crimes that you say have been committed by Israel?
Absolutely, and that's a great question because it's a two-step approach and it's a two-step process, Tulasizo. The first step is to say to them, admit the complaint and consider the complaint. In so doing, we ask you to do the following. Investigate the allegations that we've made against Israel, number one. Number two, investigate and give an opportunity to Israel to make oral responses to the complaints that we have laid or to the allegations that we've set out. Then, in the second phase, we say, allow us to provide legal and merit argument on why we say that the appointment of Israel and the granting of its observer status is unlawful, unilateral, and goes against the ethos and the philosophy and policy of the African Union and the African Commission on its own mandate. So yes, it's a two-step process. Firstly, procedural, and secondly, legal. Because in failing to do so, the next thing is to go to the UN, and if not, then the next thing thereafter is the International Court of Justice. Because ultimately, to allow an entity such as Israel, which has a history over 100 years of human rights abuses and violations against the people of Palestine, and who the people of Africa hold close to their heart, it cannot be said that it's lawful for them to have observer status, which ultimately will allow them to have a lot of say and also observe and have input in what goes on in Africa. This simply cannot be submitted, cannot be allowed.
Is this not another method by which you as lawyers are engaging in some kind of clever lawyering to try and get the allegations of war crimes and atrocities that have been leveled over a number of years against Israel to be investigated? What I'm asking is, what makes you believe that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights will make progress where the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court back in 2015 during the conflict in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and again earlier on this year in May, they were observing, they were going to investigate, but nothing really ever came of it. Is this another way of you sort of cleverly sneaking in this issue to say, investigate this, this deserves to be investigated?
The African Commission on Human and People's Rights and the African Union, by and large, is in fact a tribunal which has at its own mandate equity and justice. It has an obligation through its own undertaking to ensure that people and human rights are protected at all times. To answer your question simply, yes, it most certainly is forcing and placing pressure from the African continent on the African Union and by and large the world to say, not only have they now secured, and we don't know how, but not only have they now secured a footing in Africa, but these human rights abuses cannot simply be allowed to continue while the world blindly allows them. And if you're looking at what you're seeing now, these abuses go directly in the face of their own UN resolutions from Israel. So to allow it to carry on unabated cannot be so. So we would utilize every strategy, all legal and lawful strategies, to ensure that the world, specifically starting with the African continent, forced to investigate and are forced to investigate these human rights abuses and are forced to take Israel to task. So to answer it simply, yes, it most certainly is in addition to that. But the relief we seek right now, the relief we seek immediately, interim relief, is to say we will remove Israel as the observer status. The decision was unlawful. It cannot be set to stand. Many member states, as you've announced earlier, South Africa, Algeria, Malawi, Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, have all came out and said, no, this cannot be so. We were not consulted. And accordingly, by that approach, it's illegal.
All right, Nadim, thank you for your time and for your insights on this particular issue. Before you go, I've seen many interesting figurines in offices of lawyers and other legal practitioners. The figurine and statue of Lady Justice features a lot of times the scales of justice, a book, etc. I've never seen what you have behind you there. Could you tilt down your camera slightly as you explain what on earth is happening there?
So in essence, Tulasizwe, what this is, right, it's an illustration by an artist. These figurines depict what struggles lawyers have to go through with our own clients. And what it's actually saying at the end of the day is the lawyer is always right. Not the client, the lawyer is always right. So you have to grab the client by the scruff of his shirt sometimes and say to him, hey, listen, do as I tell you or you're more than likely going to end up in jail.
I wish more of your clients would listen to you. Thank you for that. Nadine Mohammed there speaking to us about the issue that they are bringing before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights about the observer status that was bestowed on Israel a few months ago. And of course, at the end, they're explaining his figurine there inside his office, because I'm that kind of person who will pose such questions.